Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome welcome to Wednesday. Apparently it's going to snow later today. Is that what's happening?
Yeah,
According to the arena, you looked like you're not into it? No. It's not going to be much. It'll be wet. It'll probably melt as soon as it hits the ground, but no big deal. Where are you from, Arena?
Russia.
Okay, so you're used to a lot more snow than we see here. Where in Russia?
Asian part.
Where?
Asian part.
The Asian?
Near Japan.
Oh, by Japan.
Yeah.
So like Vladivostok, or
Yeah, Vladivostok.
you're from Vladivostok?
I was born there, but now I live in near Vladivostok.
Okay, like but close to.
Yeah.
Okay, really cool. I've never. We've had Russian students before. Well, we have them now. I think they've all been from Moscow.
I know one boy from Moscow here.
Yeah,
but he's
Peter.
Russian. Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter?
Is what?
Peter? His
Yeah.
name?
I think. Well, yeah, but Peter's not here right now because he's
Okay.
still there, but he's coming back. That's really cool though. When I did my graduate work, I worked in Irkutsk, which is not quite so far east, but pretty far. For most Russians, it's probably like way out there, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. What's Vladivostok like?
I don't know.
Normalna?
Oh?
Normalna?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. But yeah, I bet you've seen some winter, hey?
Every year.
Yeah. Okay, so let's begin here. Oh yeah. So yesterday started a new unit. We talked about. I think we've got our kind of base now, right? Because we've talked about some theoretical perspectives and approaches. We've talked about we've talked about culture. We've talked about socialization. We've learned all about how mean girls can be. No, it's not the point of Mean Girls. We've learned about that. We've learned about stereotypes and prejudice and discrimination and oppression and privilege. Kind of know what all that is. So now we can actually talk about examples of oppression, right? Examples of inequality. And so we're starting here with ableism. And we said yesterday, ableism is kind of not the first. Good morning. Ableism is not the first kind of oppression that people generally think of, right? It's usually racism, it's usually sexism, and then sometimes maybe religious oppression or maybe heterosexism, right? So discrimination against LGBTQ people sometimes, but people often don't think about inequality with regard to people with disabilities. But that's kind of a mistake because there are a lot of people who can fit into this category and a lot of people who struggle because they're in this category, right? And so I gave you kind of a list here yesterday of different kind of ways in which people can be disabled and therefore kind of have certain challenges. And I said what's interesting here is that, you know, depending on what your disability is, you can have a whole different set of challenges, right? Someone who uses a wheelchair is going to have a completely different set of challenges than someone who has bipolar disorder, right? Those are totally different things. We kind of fit them into this same disability group, but you know, that's a really different experience, right? People are going to treat someone with bipolar disorder differently than they're going to treat someone in a wheelchair, right? And again, they're going to experience different struggles. And so, sorry, just jump one more here. Yeah, and so we said one of the things that's kind of, well, I guess there's a few things that are challenging for people with disabilities. If you have a physical disability, you have to kind of grapple or cope with a world that's not really built for you, right? The world is kind of constructed for able-bodied people like ourselves, right? And so again, I think I told you or suggested this to you yesterday, and I bet you it happened again today, where you came into school and you didn't really think anything of that process, right? You walked, you crossed the street, you went upstairs, you went downstairs, you looked to see if your bus was coming, you maybe stood on the bus or SkyTrain because there wasn't a lot of room. All of those things you did, and of course they require your body to do certain things, and you didn't even think about it, right? But people with physical disabilities have challenges, right? And they have to kind of plan ahead, or they have to kind of use the accommodations that we've put into place in society, right? And we do have accommodations, right? We've got elevators, we've got ramps, we've got buses that kneel, all these kinds of things, right? Even tables like this, if we had a student who used a wheelchair, of course we can just get rid of one of these chairs and they can roll right in and sit at a desk like everyone else, right? So we have made little accommodations here and there, but by and large, this is still a world that's created for us, right? Again, if you have a mental illness or a mental disability, again, there's a lot of different struggles that you may encounter, right? Depending on what those things are, right? Do you have a developmental disability? Do you have Down syndrome? Do you have a brain injury? Do you have a mental illness like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, or maybe sort of extreme depression or anxiety? Those things are all kind of different, right? And so they will challenge people in different ways. So again, this is the interesting but tricky part of this particular social group, is that people are so different, right? They are so different within this group. But the other thing that people in this group struggle with is a number of stereotypes, right? And so depending on someone's disability, people might have associations that they're somehow different from us, or that they're strange, or maybe that they're sort of not as intelligent as us. We may have stereotypes about people with mental illness being crazy, right? Because there's a strong, again, let me ask you here. Maybe you feel comfortable saying this and maybe you don't, but how do people think about mental illness in your countries? Like, is it something shameful? Is it something bad? Is it something like, will people, be like, oh God, what's wrong with you, kind of thing?
People mostly, in my country, people mostly just avoid it.
They just avoid it? You just like,
Yeah.
just try to pretend they don't see anything like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we don't know what he or she might do.
Right?
Just keep our guards up.
Well, yeah, in public, I think that's definitely true, right? Because, again, it's true. You don't really know sometimes how people are going to interact. And, one of the things about sometimes people with mental illness, we made a big deal about social norms earlier, right? And how, humans really like people to follow social norms. And when they don't, we kind of get uncomfortable and we try to get people to follow the rules again, right? But often, people who have mental illnesses, they often don't follow the rules, right? Like the guy in front of me in the SkyTrain this morning, he was standing in front of me, and the door's open and he didn't move, so I kind of went to sort of go around him and go out the door, and then I think he kind of realized that, he was standing in the way of the door, and then he like leaped out of the SkyTrain, and then like landed a few feet away, and then like did kind of a weird dance, like he was balancing on a post or something, and he was acting kind of strange, right? Most of us don't exit the SkyTrain that way, at least I don't think so. But that's kind of the thing, right? Is that they don't follow social norms, right? They don't behave according to those rules, right? And so sometimes it makes people uncomfortable, and we kind of like, oh, what's going on there, right? But it's interesting is that usually the tip-off for that, the thing that sort of alerts people to that, is the not following of social rules, right? this person is acting weird because they're not following the rules, right? When the SkyTrain doors open, you simply walk out, right? There's nothing to it, right? You don't leap out and land, right? That's very strange, right? So, yeah, it's interesting how often the breaking of social rules is what alerts people, oh, this person is different, right? And interestingly, sometimes it causes people to back away, right? Which again is a very common thing. When anyone breaks social rules, sometimes people are like, oh, what's going on here? Right? They kind of back off. They're not sure what to expect, right? And so they take a step back. Cleo, what would you say at home? How do people think about mental illness? Or do they try not to?
It's kind of
It's kind of
taboo.
what?
Taboo. Like
People
people don't talk about it.
don't talk about it? Do you at home, like kind of growing up, were you ever aware of anyone that kind of had a mental illness? And yeah, but then everyone just pretended that, yeah, just nobody talked about it? Yeah. Why do you think nobody talked about it?
It's a sensitive topic.
Yeah. Sensitive talk makes people uncomfortable,
Yeah.
right? Arena, what about at home in Russia? Do people talk about mental illness at all?
They talk, but like normally, it's usually every Sunday.
It's like what?
I'm not sure because it depends on the person,
Yeah.
but mostly we talk about it like normally.
Normally? Okay. Yeah, okay. Mir, what would you say?
I don't talk about it at all.
No? What?
They discriminate at all.
They discriminate?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give me an example? Just
They
in
either don't talk about it, like avoid it completely, or they point it out to everyone and, discriminate and make it uncomfortable for them. Make it
interesting.
feel bad. So it's one or the other.
Interesting. So everybody ignores it or they shine a big light on it. Interesting. Well, why do you think that is?
I don't know.
I guess communication is really hard for to.
Yeah, the communication in our country is not very good. Like between anyone, between the government, between
People,
If I want to communicate with someone that has mental illness, it can be hard.
yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't make sense when you connect.
Like to talk about that, people just don't get it?
Yeah.
Or
I do think it that way.
yeah. It's what was I gonna say? Yeah, it's why do you think people behave that way when they talk about mental illness? Like we seem to have the ignoring side. We have people just talking about it, right? We have kind of the ignoring, and then we have just the shining a light on it, right? And why do you think people behave that way? Why do you think people act that way? Why are people so uncomfortable?
Because this guy or whoever it is break the social norm.
Well, sometimes. But I mean, if I was in your home countries, and again, if I told people, oh, you know what, I had cancer a few years ago, people would probably be sympathetic, right? They'd be, oh gosh, that must have been terrible, I'm glad you're okay, kind of thing. But if I said, oh, a couple years ago, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and, it was a pretty bad year, but, I'm taking medication and everything's fine now and I feel great, people wouldn't feel the same way as when I had cancer, right? When I had cancer, they were sympathetic. But when I have bipolar disorder or something else, people get a little weird, don't they? They're like, oh, don't know what to say about that, right? They get a little uncomfortable, right? And it's interesting, and because I think that's kind of the pattern here as well. Although I think we're starting to get better at talking about mental illness here in Canada. We're getting there, but historically speaking, yeah, it's been tough to talk about, right? And would you say that there's a lot of shame associated with mental illness? Right? People maybe don't want to talk about mental illness because they feel
Shame.
yeah, shame. Like it's weak, right? It's like someone who has a mental illness is weak or crazy or weird, or there's just something wrong with them, right? And but it's interesting because it's, you know, we wouldn't feel there wouldn't be that shame if somebody had cancer, right? There'd be no shame. It would be like, oh, that poor person, right? We would feel, or, you know, if someone had, oh gosh, I don't know, what's another.
I guess cancer is more severe than the
Well, sometimes, yeah. I mean, but, you know, people's mental illness, if it's a severe enough one, can really turn their life upside down, right? Like, I think, you know, if you went over there, you know, just on the other side of that field, you would probably find a lot of people who are struggling with traumatic experiences, or mental illness, or drug or alcohol addiction, or all three of those things, right? Or various other mental or physical disabilities. You find lots of people over there like that, right? And it's yeah, like it's interesting how we don't kind of think about those things the same way, right? But do you think in your home, David, I didn't ask you, but do people talk about mental illness at home at all?
Yeah, like you said, kind of looks shame on those people.
Yeah. Yeah, like it would be more difficult for someone to admit that they had a mental illness as opposed to a physical one.
Yeah, how to communicate with like other people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting, right? Because again, nobody would, you know, if you had cancer, nobody would feel it was your fault, right? Nobody would feel that, oh, of course you got cancer, you're so weak, right? Nobody would say such a horrible thing to you. But again, with mental illnesses, people will kind of feel that way, right? There are stereotypes about mental illness being, you know, people who are weaker, right? Or people who are they're just crazy, right? And there's a negative stigma attached to that, right? There's no negative stigma about having cancer, right? Good people get cancer all the time, right? Unfortunately. But yeah, we have this kind of underlying stereotype, and so people find it very easy to talk about physical ailments, right? Physical illnesses, but they find it very difficult to talk about mental illnesses, right? And it seems like most of the time we just don't talk about it at all, right? Which again can be very comforting for those of us who don't have mental illness, right? Because that's a privilege thing, right? Part of privilege is that you get to ignore something about an experience of the minoritized group, right? If I want to, I can ignore racism in Canada because it's usually not directed at me, right? That's part of my privilege. I try not to, but I can't ignore it because it's not focused on me, right? Same thing with mental illness, right? Ooh, gee, it makes me uncomfortable. I think I'll just pretend it doesn't exist. And if I don't have a mental illness, I can do that, right? But if I do have a mental illness, or if I'm maybe someone close to me, a friend or someone in my family is struggling with one, it's much harder to ignore, right? You kind of have to deal with it somehow. And so you can see how these kind of stereotypes about people with mental illness are actually probably make it much more difficult for people with mental illnesses to get help, right? To get treatment. Again, if you get diagnosed with cancer in Canada, things are going to happen quick, right? You're going to see an oncologist, you're going to get medication and maybe chemo, and things will happen really quickly, right? They are on it, which is great. But if you get diagnosed with a mental illness, the help is much kind of more difficult to get. Things move a lot more slowly, right?
Is there
And
any medication?
yeah, what's that?
Is there any medication?
Yeah, there's lots of medication out there for people with extreme,
Feel love?
extreme depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. There's lots of things out there that can work and can sort of help people return to a kind of normal baseline, right? Whatever's happening for them, right? It can help them kind of return to normal. But it does take some time. Some of the medications work for some people. Look at those geese. Some of those medications work for some people and not for others, right? So you kind of have to test it out to see what works for you, and it's a bit of a process sometimes. But yeah, there's medications out there that can help people, right? But again, when we have this stigma, when we have this sort of negative stereotype, nobody would want to admit that they have a mental illness. And then if they do admit it, nobody wants to talk about it. And then it makes it harder to get treatment because as a society, we don't really prioritize it the same way as we prioritize physical illness, right? And so, yeah, even within this disability group, there are some people that have sort of, they're going to have a better experience, right? They're going to have fewer challenges. Their challenge is going to be the disease itself, not, the disease plus the fact that nobody wants to talk about it, and, help is more difficult to find, right? So, again, even within this disability group, some people are going to struggle more than others just because of the nature of their disability, right? Yeah, good so far? Good so far? Does anyone, before I'm going to shift gears and move on, but does anyone else have any other mental health or mental illness questions or things they wanted to talk about while we're on the subject?
Is there any other thing that being not being ignored, or less focused, just like mental?
Well,
I mean,
like
for
within
example.
within disabilities?
Yeah. Maybe not. I just wonder if there any.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting. It's difficult because there's just so many different kind of experiences, right? And so I think people with physical health challenges are often better accommodated than people with mental health or developmental health challenges. Okay, so I feel like someone in a wheelchair is far better off than someone who has bipolar disorder, right? But again, I shouldn't say that. Scratch that, take it back. You don't really want to get into comparing disabilities and whose is worse. You don't really want to do that. But I feel like it might be easier to access support for physical disabilities as opposed to mental or developmental challenges. Okay. Yeah, I think that's as far as I could go. I don't want to get into comparing who has it worse. You don't want to do that. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's switch gears here, and yeah, we'll meet someone who has a disability. We'll meet him firsthand in the documentary, and we'll kind of see what he has to say. Now, I'll put this on the screen, and then I've just got to pop it into Microsoft Teams. Where is it? Here it is. And the documentary itself is called The Ugly Face of Disability Hate Crime. And so in it, we're going to meet a guy by the name of Adam Pearson. Okay, so Adam has a disability, and he'll kind of take us through some of his experiences. So there'll be kind of an incident which kind of kicks off this documentary, I guess. But then he'll kind of explain to us how what his experience is like in the world, right? How other people interact with him. Sorry, I'm just putting this in Teams. That's why I'm distracted. I'm not shopping for shoes, I promise. There we go. So he's going to talk to us about how people kind of interact with him, what his experience is like. He's going to talk about disability hate crimes and why there seems to be fewer of them being punished than one might think. And then he's going to talk about maybe some ways in which he can battle the stereotypes against him, right? How he can change things. Now, before we hop into it, what's a hate crime? Huh? Were you? What is a hate crime? We know what a crime is, right? What's a hate crime?
The thing that you don't like.
Uh-huh.
Right. It's basically a bad thing.
It's what?
Basically bad thing.
It's a bad thing.
So you hate it.
So are peas, but they're not a hate crime. Mir, what do you think?
The crimes from hate.
Yeah, right. When you're the crime you commit is motivated by hate, right? So if I, decide I'm going to punch someone in the face just because I think they're an idiot, that's a crime, right? That's an assault. But if I punch them in the face because they are of a certain race or ethnicity, or a certain gender, or their sexuality, or their religion, right? If I punch them in the face for that reason, that's a hate crime, right? That's an assault that is motivated by what's that?
That is racist.
Well, it can be, right? If you have racist prejudices and they motivate you to commit a crime, that's a hate crime, right? If somebody goes to a Jewish synagogue, right, a Jewish place of worship, and they paint Nazi symbols on the front, that's a hate crime, right? You're doing that because of their either religion or their ethnicity or both, right? So you're not just doing it, if you just spray graffiti on that building down there and you're like, Chen was here kind of thing, that's a crime, but it's not a hate crime, right? Because it's not motivated by hate, it's motivated by whatever. Why did you do that? Why did you do that, Chen? Vandalism is not cool. I don't care what your friends say. Okay. So it's a crime that is motivated by hate. You do something wrong, but you are motivated by your negative prejudices towards someone or the social group they belong to. Okay? And it's a bad thing. Just like peas. But peas are probably just a little less bad than hate crime. Pretty close, but sorry, I don't like them. Okay, so we're gonna watch this documentary. We're gonna meet Adam Pearson, and again, I've got some questions that I want to ask you here. Okay, so there's a lot of questions here. Some of them are pretty easy though. What social groups does Adam belong to, and which of these are dominant and which one are minoritized? Okay. In what ways has Adam experienced discrimination? I said, are any of these microaggressions, but we didn't really talk about microaggressions yet, did we? We didn't talk about those? No, we didn't. Okay, don't worry about that. In what ways does Adam and other disabled persons deal with prejudicial statements or discrimination or microaggressions? Sorry. Why do they respond in this way? Okay. Someone convicted of assaulting a disabled person will spend less time in prison than someone convicted of assaulting a person belonging to a racial or a religious minority. Why do disability hate crimes get softer sentences? Why do they get more lenient sentences? Okay. What is the issue with how disability hate crimes are prosecuted? So when they go to trial, what's kind of the issue there? And what social institutions are involved? There's a lot of questions, but that's okay. What kind of stereotypical or prejudicial ideas have shaped Adam's childhood and his adult life? Okay, he'll be at a movie theater talking about that. We'll see Adam participate in a psychological experiment. Okay, so he'll kind of help out this researcher in running this experiment. What does he decide to do as a result? How is that helpful? How is it not helpful? And are disabled people oppressed in British society? What's evidence for this and what's not evidence? Okay, I know it's a lot of questions, but it'll make sense as we watch. Okay. So the link is there, as you can see. Let's watch 25 minutes, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and answer questions that we are able to. Okay. So online people, the link and the questions are on Microsoft Teams, so I'll turn you loose. You can watch 25 minutes. I can't spell minutes. Take a break and then we'll come back. Okay, so see you in a bit, online people. All right, and we're back. So, obviously we've met. Good morning. Obviously we've met our good friend Adam Pearson, right? And we've learned a little bit about him. Let's start with number one, but maybe anything. What have we learned about Adam Pearson?
He has disabilities with face.
Yeah, he has. He has. That's quite a face, right? I think we can say that's quite a face, right? He says that you may have seen me on the television. I have one of those faces. Yes, you do. So he has a facial disfigurement, right? And he says he has some other disabilities too. He can't see out of one eye, right? And his other eye is, he's got partial vision, but not full vision. What else do we learn about Adam?
And he also partially deaf.
I don't think he is. Did he say that?
Said just like the other person.
Oh, okay. Okay, so he's got a little bit of hearing impairment as well. Okay. What else do we know about him? What kind of social groups does he belong to?
The minority.
Yeah, so he's a disabled person, right? We know that. What else about him, though?
His voice kind of deep.
His voice is kind of deep. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. What else? Arena, what else do we know about him?
There's a twin brother.
Does he have three or two, or just one?
One.
Oh yeah, he has one. He has a twin brother, right? That's a twin brother, Neil. Of course, Neil looks a little different, right? Because the
What happened? I didn't catch it.
he has a condition where non-cancerous tumors grow on the endings of his nerves. Well, but yeah, so for Adam, that it's in his face that those tumors grow. Neil, apparently the condition affects him differently. I don't know how, but obviously not on his face, because his face is kind of normal, right? What else do we know about Adam? So he's an actor, right? Been in a movie with Scarlett Johansson. Not bad.
He was bullied in high school.
Was bullied in high school. Yeah, we know that. What else?
He made a movement. No. What is it? He made a movement for disability people.
Well, he's kind of, yeah, he made this documentary, right? Yeah, he did that. What race is he? What's that? What race? Yeah. Racist? Oh, British. Yeah. He's okay. So he's a British guy. He's a white British guy. What about gender?
Male.
Yeah, he's a guy, right? He's a male. What about religion?
I didn't get it.
Yeah, there's no real reference to it. We can probably assume he comes from a Christian background, right? Britain's a Christian country. We don't know for sure. What about sexuality? Gay, straight? What do you think? Yeah, he's probably straight. Like we don't get any. I don't really get any kind of indication from him. But again, the majority of people are straight. So if you had to bet money, I would bet he's probably straight. British citizen, do you think? British citizen, probably was born there. English speaker? Yes. What about socioeconomic status? Rich guy, poor guy, somewhere in the middle? Yeah, somewhere in the middle. I guess he lives with his parents still and his brother Neil, so I don't know. Yeah, maybe middle to lower middle, somewhere in there, right? So why do I bring this up? Well, it's interesting to think because Adam here belongs to a minoritized group, right? He's a disabled person, but he also belongs to other social groups, and in those groups are dominant groups, right? He's white, he's a British citizen, he's an English speaker, comes from a Christian background, probably straight, right? He's a guy. All of those are dominant group identities in Britain, right? So he's a member of a lot of dominant groups, but in this one, he's a minoritized group, and of course, as we see, that's going to have a pretty significant effect on his life, right? So in what ways has Adam kind of experienced discrimination? What do we see?
People don't want to separate them.
What's that?
People don't want to separate them.
Yeah, right? They had a little hidden camera on the bus, and yeah, he sits on the bus and nobody sits anywhere near him. Not beside him, not in front of him,
Like in the back.
not even behind him, right? Which, I don't know, how do you think that feels? Might feel a little lonely, right? I don't know about you. When I get on the bus or SkyTrain and I sit down, I kind of hope nobody sits next to me,
Yeah.
right? I kind of like my elbow room. I don't want to be crammed in there, especially during COVID. I don't want somebody breathing my face. I'm kind of a big guy anyway, so I take up probably a little more than half of the seat. I don't really want people sitting beside me. I want my elbow room, right? But for Adam, yeah, it probably feels, pardon me, it probably feels a little lonely or uncomfortable or like he's being rejected when nobody ever sits beside him, right? Or goes like out of their way to make sure that they don't sit anywhere near him, right? What else do we see in terms of discrimination for him? Or let's say, how do people treat him or other people with disabilities? So we've met Adam. We met Dan. Dan is the soldier who uses the wheelchair. We met Dan. We met Lucas, who's the young man that Adam meets at school. And we've met Hayden,
Who's that?
the guy with the hair.
Yeah, the guy.
That's Hayden.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So what do we hear about from Adam and from these other individuals? Let's start with Dan. What happens in the bar with Dan?
Gets punched.
Nope. Dan didn't get punched. He's in the wheelchair.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But that woman comes up to him, right? And what does she say? Yeah, she starts to ask, like, she says, "Oh, can't you stand?" Seems to be kind of a rude thing to say, right? No, I'm just in a wheelchair because it's more comfortable. Come on, right? No, he can't stand. That's why he uses the chair. Like, give me a break. And then what does she ask him to do?
Oh, the wheelie.
Yeah, she asked him to do a wheelie, right? Where, if you want to be fancy in your wheelchair, you can kind of like roll up on your back wheels. It's kind of cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is kind of cool. But yeah, she tells him to do a wheelie, right? Is that kind of is that polite? Do you just walk up to someone that you've never met and tell them to do things? Can you imagine if someone told you, if you're standing waiting for the SkyTrain and somebody walked up and said, "Hey, do a handstand"? It's like, "Hey, get lost," right? Like, you don't just walk up to people and tell them what to do, right? That's not polite. That's pretty rude. And so, yeah, so she's probably a little drunk, but she kind of acts in a pretty rude way toward him, doesn't she? Should we talk about this now or later? Oh yeah, let's talk about it now. One of the things that I think Adam says, I think it's Adam, it might be Adam or Dan, but when they're talking, Adam says, yeah, when we're out in public, sometimes we get treated as if we're public property. Did you hear that? Do you have any kind of idea what they might be talking about there or what they mean?
Maybe people stare at them.
Yeah, people, and I think people probably do stare at Adam, right? That's a face that you would probably look twice at, right? It's very different, right? Chloe, what were you thinking? They didn't what? They didn't respect him, right? They they kind of treated him as if they didn't have to follow social rules, right? And this is something that happens with minoritized groups as well, right? When dominant groups are kind of acting out their privilege, and we haven't talked about this yet, when they're kind of acting out their privilege, they kind of don't obey social rules anymore. They don't feel that they have to follow social norms, right? So again, this woman walks up to Dan. Oh, can't you stand? Do a wheelie. You don't just walk up to people and tell them what to do, right? You don't point out things that are, obvious, that, are obvious, but someone might be sensitive about. You don't go up to someone and, boy, you really didn't have a shower this morning, did you? You don't do that to people, right? That's rude, right? But again, with people, when the dominant group is interacting with minoritized groups, sometimes they subconsciously feel that they don't have to follow social norms anymore, right? And so that's what we see with that woman. She acts a little bit differently, right? And we kind of see it too at the beginning when Adam's coming in and the guy's like, oh, I know you from the television. Come here, give me a hug. You don't hug people you don't know, do you? I don't know. Depends on your culture, I guess. But here in Canada, I don't hug anyone I don't know. No, thank you. A good hug is awesome, but you don't want to hug from just some rando, right? What happens with what do we hear about with Lucas, the young man in the school? What's Lucas tell us? What happened to him?
He was punched in the nose.
No, that's still Hayden. Hayden's the guy in the bar. Luke, what's that? Yeah, he kind of, he got, pushed around and somebody like stepped on his head or something and they called him Elephant Man and all kind of pretty mean stuff, right? And what does Lucas kind of say about that treatment? No? It's okay. Kind of, what did you hear? He kind of talks about parents a little bit, doesn't he? What does he say? Yeah, they kind of they pick up either these stereotypes or ideas or prejudices from their parents, right? Because he says, yeah, some kid called me Elephant Man, but kids don't know who the Elephant Man is. Do any of you know who he is? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about when I say Elephant Man? No. And well, and 6-year-old kids don't know either, right? Elephant Man is it was a nickname for a man named John Merrick, he's from Britain. He's alive in I think the late 1800s, and he had a disease called it was called elephantitis, but it's got a more medical name. But it's kind of like Adam's disease where like tumors grow. And so if you Google this guy, you'll see that he's quite misshapen by his disability. Yeah, there you go. So the kids called him that, but most kids don't really know who that guy is, right? And so Lucas is saying, well, they've clearly learned it from somewhere. They probably learned it from their parents, right? And so again, we see that socialization is important because prejudices and stereotypes get passed on, right? Either on purpose or just accidentally. And now we're all reading about John Merrick. And so and our friend in the bar there, Hayden, he has a similar experience, right? People, he's been assaulted twice in a bar, kind of just for looking the way that he does, right? And so what happened? Hayden tells us in the bar. Hayden tells us that he was assaulted twice. And what happened the first time? Somebody punched him out of nowhere. Sucker punched him. What did he do? With the hair.
He didn't report it.
The second time he didn't, but the first time Yeah, the first time he did report it,
but it doesn't really work.
it kind of, yeah, like, well, it kind of didn't go anywhere, right? The cops kind of shrugged their shoulders. They looked at the video, the security video from the club, and they're like, oh, we can't really see who it is. They kind of didn't really do anything, right? And so the second time it happened, did he report it? No, right? And again, why would you, right? If the cops are just going to go, what could we do, right? Why would he go to the trouble of reporting a crime that the police are just going to, sorry, nothing we can do. Not helpful, right? Right, and so here's the hate crime part that we're coming to, right? So Adam says that it's estimated that there are 63,000 disability hate crimes happening in Britain every year, but only a few thousand actually get reported, right? And so he's kind of asking the question, well, what's going on, right? Why is there that big difference in number? And so he's going to kind of look into the legal system now and try to figure out what's going on, okay? So we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'd like to squeeze in 10 more minutes on this. And so online people, I guess that's just Anna at this point. Anna, I'm going to end the live stream here and turn you loose. Just watch 10 more minutes of the documentary and then we'll pick it up tomorrow, okay? So I'll end the live stream now and I guess Anna will see you in history, okay? So, bye.